I'm writing this at almost 2 a.m. because I can't sleep and my brain won't shut up, and I think if I don't get this out somewhere I'm going to explode, so sorry in advance if this is long and messy and all over the place. I'm a 29-year-old woman, my partner is a 32-year-old man, and we were together a little over 6 years, married for 2 of them, which is still weird to type because part of me hasn't caught up to the fact that this is even my life right now. From the outside, we looked solid in that very boring, very respectable way that makes people stop asking questions once you hit your late 20s, like, oh okay, they're good, they figured it out, and honestly I thought we had too. We met when I was 23 and he was 26, both of us tired of dating apps and half-assed situationships, and it felt refreshingly adult from the start. He had a stable job, I was finishing grad school, we both liked quiet nights, Trader Joe's runs, stupid reality TV, and talking about future plans in that half-joking, half-serious way where you pretend you're not secretly hoping it all comes true. He wasn't flashy or overly romantic, but he was consistent, which at the time felt way more important, and I remember telling my friends that he made me feel calm, like my nervous system could finally rest around someone. We moved in together after about a year and a half, which felt like the natural next step rather than some dramatic leap, and life kind of settled into this rhythm that I genuinely loved. Weekday mornings were rushed and chaotic, weekends were slow, we had our favorite takeout places memorized, our inside jokes were stupid but comforting, and we had this unspoken understanding of how to coexist without stepping on each other too much. We talked about marriage early on, not in a pressured way, but more like acknowledging that we were on the same path, and when he proposed it wasn't some big surprise because it already felt like we were building something permanent together. What made me trust him so deeply, and this is the part that hurts the most now, is that he always positioned himself as the safe one, the rational one, the person who valued honesty and emotional maturity. He was the guy who talked openly about therapy, who said communication was everything, who prided himself on not being like toxic men and who made a point of saying he wanted a partnership, not control. I had been in a really unhealthy relationship before him, and he knew that, and I think that context made me lower my guard in ways I didn't even realize at the time because he felt like the opposite of chaos. Our shared life felt real and grounded in a way that's hard to fake over that many years. We had joint savings goals, talked about kids in the abstract future sense, debated where we might want to live long-term, argued about dumb stuff like whose turn it was to do dishes but always made up before going to bed. I trusted him with my insecurities, my anxiety, the parts of myself I usually kept hidden because they felt like too much, and he never made me feel dramatic or annoying for having them. Or at least, that's how it felt then. His family was always very present in his life, which I initially saw as a green flag, because he talked about them like they were close but not overbearing, and I didn't come from a super tight-knit family myself, so it almost felt nice, like I was marrying into something warm and supportive. His mom checked in often, his sister was involved in everything, and at first I thought it was just one of those families where everyone knows everyone's business, and I tried to adapt to that without making a big deal out of it. Looking back, I can already see the cracks there, but at the time I really believed that love plus communication could handle a little extra noise. We got married in a small ceremony that honestly felt perfect to me, surrounded by friends and family who all kept telling us how solid we were, how obvious it was that we were a team, how we just made sense together. I remember standing there thinking that this was it, that all the chaos I had survived before had led me to this calm, dependable future, and that feeling carried me for a long time. Even when things got stressful, even when we argued more than I expected during the first year of marriage, I kept telling myself that this was normal, that all long-term relationships have rough patches, and that the fact we could talk things through meant we were doing it right. The thing is, when a relationship looks stable from the outside, people don't question it, and eventually you stop questioning it too. You assume that the discomfort you feel is just part of adult life, that the moments of unease are your own anxiety flaring up, that if something were truly wrong you'd know it in a clear, undeniable way. I told myself that love wasn't supposed to feel exciting all the time, that calm sometimes looks like boredom, that security doesn't always feel good but it's still good for you. I built my identity around being the one who chose right this time, who learned from past mistakes, who finally had a healthy, grown-up relationship. And that's probably why what happened next completely shattered me, because it wasn't some obvious betrayal that you see coming from miles away. It was something that crept in quietly while I was busy trusting, while I was making plans and building a future on a foundation I thought was solid. I didn't go looking for the truth, I didn't have suspicions, I was actively investigating, and I think that's the part that still makes my stomach drop when I think about it, because it means I was living inside a version of reality that wasn't fully real, and I had no idea. I'll explain how I found out, but I need to take a breath before I even get into that, because once I do, everything changes, and even writing this now my chest feels tight like my body remembers before my brain fully does. Part 2. Before everything blew up, before I started replaying conversations in my head like security footage, there was this long stretch of time where I genuinely believed we were fine and that any weirdness I felt was just me needing to adjust to married life and, honestly, to being part of someone else's family in a much more permanent way. I want to explain that part properly because I don't want this to sound like I woke up one day and suddenly everything was awful. It really wasn't like that. It was slow and subtle and wrapped in enough normalcy that I kept explaining it away. After we got married, his family became more involved in our day-to-day life, not in a dramatic, show-up unannounced everyday way, but in this constant background presence that never really shut off. Group chats, weekly calls, family dinners that weren't technically mandatory but somehow felt that way, and this expectation that we would loop them into decisions that, in my head, were just between us. At first I tried to lean into it because I didn't want to be the stereotypical wife who pulls him away from his family, and he reassured me a lot early on that he appreciated how understanding I was about it. The thing is, understanding slowly turned into accommodating, and accommodating quietly turned into me swallowing my discomfort because I didn't want to be seen as difficult or dramatic. His mom had opinions about everything, from where we lived to how we spent holidays to little comments about my job that were framed as concern but always landed like judgment. His sister would joke about how he used to do things differently before me, always with a laugh, always with plausible deniability, and I would laugh too because calling it out felt petty even though it chipped away at me every time. What really anchored my trust in him during all of this was the way he talked to me privately. He would say things like, "I know my family can be a lot," or "You're my priority, I just don't want to create unnecessary drama," and that made me feel like we were on the same team even when I was uncomfortable. He framed it as a balancing act, like adulthood was just this constant negotiation between different loyalties, and I believed him because that sounded reasonable and mature and not at all like a red flag when you're not looking for one. Our routine stayed mostly the same, and that normalcy kept me grounded in the belief that nothing was fundamentally wrong. We still cooked together, still planned trips, still talked about future stuff like buying a house and maybe starting a family in a couple of years. He would hold my hand at family gatherings, squeeze it when his mom said something passive-aggressive, and later tell me she meant well but didn't always know how to express it. I told myself that love sometimes means patience, that families are messy, and that if this was the biggest challenge we faced, we were honestly doing pretty well. Looking back now, I can see how often he positioned himself as the middleman, the reasonable translator between me and his family, and how that dynamic slowly isolated me without me realizing it. If I felt hurt by something they said or did, it became this conversation about tone and intention and how I might be interpreting things too personally. He never outright told me I was wrong, which is what made it so effective. He just suggested alternative explanations until I started doubting my own reactions and softening my boundaries to keep the peace. There were moments, little ones, where my gut would flare up and I'd think, "This doesn't feel right," like when his mom casually mentioned private things about our relationship that I knew I hadn't shared, or when his sister would reference arguments we'd had in a way that made it clear he'd vented to them without telling me. Every time I brought it up, he'd apologize, say he didn't realize it crossed a line, promise to be more mindful, and I'd let it go because I wanted to believe that good intentions mattered more than impact. I also trusted him because he always framed himself as someone who hated conflict, especially with family, and I related to that deeply. I didn't grow up in a household where confrontation was safe or productive, so the idea of keeping things smooth felt familiar and comforting even when it cost me something internally. We talked a lot about being a united front, about protecting our relationship from outside stress, and I genuinely thought that's what we were doing, even as I was slowly becoming the only one bending. From the outside, nothing looked alarming, and that's important to say because even my friends thought I was lucky. He was supportive, attentive, involved, and when I mentioned small family-related frustrations, people would shrug and say that in-laws are just like that sometimes, especially moms with sons. I absorbed all of that validation and used it to silence the parts of me that were getting louder, the parts that felt increasingly small and unseen in my own marriage. There's this weird guilt that comes with trusting someone who doesn't deserve it, because you start to feel complicit in your own hurt, like you should have known better or pushed harder or seen the signs earlier. At the time though, it didn't feel like ignoring red flags, it felt like choosing empathy and compromise and believing that the person you married actually had your back even when things were uncomfortable. I wasn't naive in the way people imagine, I was just committed, and I believed that commitment meant working through discomfort rather than immediately labeling it as danger. By the time the first real crack appeared, the kind you can't unsee once it's there, I was so deep into trusting his version of events and his explanations that my first instinct wasn't anger or suspicion, it was confusion. I remember feeling disoriented more than anything else, like the emotional equivalent of standing on a floor you thought was solid and realizing it's slightly tilted, not enough to knock you over, just enough to make you question your balance. I didn't know yet that what I was sensing wasn't just family awkwardness or normal marital growing pains, but something much more deliberate and coordinated, something that involved conversations I wasn't part of and decisions being made about my life without me in the room. At that point, I still believed that if something truly serious was happening, my husband would tell me, because that's what partners do, and because I trusted him in a way that felt unbreakable. That trust is the reason the discovery hit as hard as it did, and the reason I still feel sick thinking about how casual and accidental the moment was when everything finally snapped into focus. Part 3. I didn't discover what was happening because I went digging or because I had a feeling something was wrong. I need to say that straight off the bat because I can already hear people rewriting my story in their heads, like she must have suspected it or she probably snooped. No. I wasn't looking for trouble, I wasn't tracking him, I wasn't overthinking or imagining things. I was just living my life, trying to be a grown-up, married woman in what I thought was a stable relationship, believing in the foundation I'd built with him for years. And then it happened, completely out of nowhere, on a Tuesday, just like any other Tuesday, the kind where the day drags but nothing feels dramatic. I came home from work a little early because I wanted to catch up on some reading and maybe cook dinner for us, and his laptop was open on the kitchen table like it usually was when he got up for coffee or to grab a snack. I walked past it, completely unconcerned, and that's when I noticed a notification pop up, a Slack message from his colleague, someone I knew fairly well, nothing unusual in isolation. But the preview was odd. It said, "Hey, just checking. Did you make sure she didn't notice last night?" And my brain stalled. I literally froze, like someone hit pause on reality, because at first I couldn't even process the words. I told myself it was probably work-related, maybe referencing a project or a joke, and I tried to walk past it, but my body didn't cooperate. My eyes didn't leave the screen. Curiosity wasn't even the right word, it felt involuntary, like gravity or reflex. I clicked on the message. And that's when it all started to unravel, faster than my mind could keep up. The thread wasn't about work at all. It was detailed, casual, intimate, and it referenced me in a way that made my stomach drop. Small things at first, remember last weekend or she wouldn't suspect it here, and then the specifics hit, details about our apartment, our bed, our living room, moments I had trusted as private. It wasn't flirty or vague, it wasn't one-off, it was systematic, like an entire shadow life had existed beneath the one I thought I was living. I scrolled. Slowly at first, in disbelief, hoping that context would suddenly appear, that it would make sense in some benign way, that I had misunderstood. But there was no benign way. Every line reinforced the same terrifying truth, he wasn't just keeping secrets, he was actively participating in them, and multiple people I trusted were involved. There were references to people coming over while I was out, coordinating timings, making sure they didn't run into me, joking about how bold it was to do certain things in our space. I felt sick. physically nauseated, like my stomach had been punched out from under me. I ran to the bathroom and threw up, not metaphorically, actually threw up because my body refused to process the shock any other way. When I came back, I sat down and kept reading, desperate to map it all out, desperate to figure out exactly what was real and what might be misinterpreted. And what I found made my head spin because it was worse than I could have imagined. It wasn't just one person. It wasn't just one colleague or some isolated mistake. There were multiple people, friends, coworkers, even people I thought I could trust, someone who had been around since college, a guy he used to hang out with weekly, all of them involved in some way. And it wasn't sloppy or secretive in a scared way, it was organized. Casual. Comfortable. Like they had rehearsed this in the way you rehearse going on vacation or doing taxes, like it was routine for them to manage my life while pretending to be my friends. And then I saw something that made it all surreal, one message where he literally said, "Don't worry, I've got her. She won't find out." And the way it was typed, like it was just a fact, like it was obvious, like I was nothing more than a box to be managed, a variable to control, a problem to solve. I couldn't breathe. I don't think I even realized I was shaking until my hands started cramping from scrolling, trying to piece together the timeline. Weeks, months, even years of messages, coordinating meetings, referencing things I had thought were normal nights out, jokes we'd all laughed at in the living room that were clearly meant as distractions. I couldn't stop reading, and at the same time, I wanted to stop so badly, like if I looked away, maybe this reality wouldn't stick. And then I saw the part that cut the deepest, my best friend's name. Someone I had trusted with everything, who had been part of my support system, was in on it, helping to hide things, covering for him when I was around, strategically distracting me. The text was casual, laughing even, like it was funny that I had no idea. It made my stomach churn in a completely different way because I realized I wasn't just betrayed romantically, I was betrayed socially, psychologically, emotionally, by the very people I relied on. I left the apartment after that, wandering aimlessly through the streets, my phone buzzing constantly from people I didn't even want to answer. I walked for hours, retracing paths I used to find comfort on, replaying every interaction, every hug, every casual conversation, trying to find some sign that I had known, something that could make this make sense. Nothing did. I felt hollow, exposed, like I had been living in a simulation designed to keep me blind, and the thing that haunted me most was how normal everything had felt before this moment, how safe, how calm, how utterly human it all seemed until the illusion cracked. By the time I came home, hours later, my brain was still spinning. He was there, on the couch, watching TV, completely normal, and I remember standing in the doorway, looking at him, and feeling nothing familiar at all. No love, no anger yet, just an eerie sense that the person I married was a stranger who had learned to live in my world without ever actually inhabiting it. And that's when I realized the hardest part. I could confront him, I could scream or cry or demand answers, but the person I thought I knew, the person I trusted with my life, had already made a choice for me, and whatever I did next would never restore the foundation I thought existed. Next part is where I confront him. Where the gaslighting, the excuses, and the quiet cruelty begin. Where the moments of self-doubt almost drown me completely and I start to question not just him, but myself. Part 4 Final. I didn't confront him in some dramatic, perfectly planned way. I didn't rehearse a speech or wait for the right moment. I sat on that information for one night, barely slept, stared at the ceiling while my brain replayed screenshots and messages and names over and over like some kind of mental torture loop, and by morning I felt like if I didn't say something I was going to actually lose my mind. I was shaky, I was exhausted, and I was running on pure adrenaline and rage and this deep, aching grief that hadn't even fully hit me yet. He was in the kitchen when I walked in, making coffee like nothing in the world was wrong, humming quietly, and I remember this weird, detached thought passing through my head about how insane it was that the man who had just shattered my entire sense of reality could look so normal. I didn't ease into it. I didn't ask questions. I said his name, and when he turned around I just told him I had seen the messages. The change in his face was instant. Not confusion. Not shock. Recognition. His eyes flicked for half a second toward his laptop on the counter and then back to me, and in that tiny moment I knew everything I needed to know. He tried to play it cool at first, asked what I was talking about, said I must have misunderstood something, but his voice had that tight edge to it, that careful tone people use when they're trying to keep control of a situation that's slipping. I told him exactly what I saw, names, dates, things they'd said about me, about our apartment, about how I wouldn't notice, and his face went pale in a way that made me feel almost sick with vindication. And then the gaslighting started, not all at once, but in layers. He said the messages were jokes, that people exaggerate, that I didn't understand the context because I wasn't part of the group. He said they had dark humor and sometimes it went too far, and that it was stupid and immature but not what I thought. I almost laughed. I didn't, but I wanted to, because it was so absurd to hear him say that when I had literally read explicit, detailed conversations about him betraying me. When I pushed back, when I told him that wasn't possible because of what I had seen, he shifted tactics and got defensive, accused me of invading his privacy, of breaking his trust by looking at his messages. That's when I felt something inside me crack in a different way, because somehow we were already at the point where I was being framed as the problem. Then came the minimizing. He said it wasn't emotional, that it didn't mean anything, that it was just stress and stupid choices and that I was blowing it out of proportion. He said every couple has rough patches, that this was just something that got out of hand, that it didn't change how he felt about me. He kept repeating that last part like it was supposed to fix everything, like "I still love you" was a magic eraser for betrayal. At one point, he actually started crying, and I know how that sounds, but it threw me off, because part of me still loved him and didn't want to see him in pain. He said he felt trapped between me and everyone else, that he didn't know how to make everyone happy, that he was under so much pressure from work and from his family and from expectations, and that these people had just been a way to feel understood. He didn't frame it as something he did to me, but something that happened to him. And for a horrifying moment, I felt myself softening. I started wondering if I had missed signs of how overwhelmed he was, if I had been too demanding, if maybe I wasn't as supportive as I thought. That's the part that scares me the most now, how easy it was for him to redirect the narrative until I was the one questioning myself instead of him. But then I remembered something. I remembered the messages where they joked about me, about how I'd be destroyed if I knew, about how easy it was to manipulate my schedule, my trust, my love. I remembered my best friend's name in that thread, laughing along, helping to cover it all up. And suddenly the tears and the excuses didn't feel sad anymore, they felt strategic. I asked him point blank why my best friend was involved, why someone who had been in my life for years was part of this. He froze. Not long, just enough to tell me the truth was ugly. He said it wasn't like that he hadn't meant for anyone else to get involved, that things just spiraled. Which was a fancy way of saying he had let my entire support system become complicit in lying to me. That's when I knew I couldn't stay. It wasn't just that he cheated, it was that he built a whole fake reality around me and recruited people I trusted to help maintain it. There was nothing left to salvage there, no foundation to rebuild on, just a pile of manipulated memories and moments that now felt tainted. I packed a bag while he was still talking, still trying to justify, still promising therapy, honesty, whatever he thought I wanted to hear. I didn't yell. I didn't cry in that moment. I felt weirdly calm, like my nervous system had shut down just enough to get me out the door. I went to a friend's place, not my best friend, obviously, and when I finally sat down somewhere safe, I completely lost it. I cried so hard I could barely breathe, not just for the relationship, but for the version of myself that had trusted so deeply and so sincerely. The fallout was brutal. People picked sides. Stories got twisted. He tried to paint it as mutual misunderstandings, as me overreacting, as a messy situation rather than a betrayal. I cut off people I never thought I'd lose. I started therapy. I stopped trusting my own instincts for a while and had to slowly relearn what my gut even felt like. I'm not the same person I was before this, and honestly I don't know if that's good or bad yet. I'm more guarded, more skeptical, but also more honest with myself about what I deserve. I don't accept "I didn't mean to" as an excuse anymore. I don't swallow discomfort just to keep the peace. So here I am, on Reddit, trauma dumping to strangers because somehow that feels safer than talking to the people who knew me before everything fell apart. AITA for expecting my husband to choose me, to set boundaries, to not let everyone in our lives lie to my face for months, or am I really as unreasonable as he keeps implying I am?